Thanks to Dave for giving me the opportunity to tell my story. My name is Ben, and 3 years ago I had everything I thought mattered. A beautiful daughter, a successful career as a financial advisor, and what I foolishly believed was a rock-solid marriage. Now I'm sitting here with a glass of bourbon that's been refilled more times than I care to admit, trying to piece together how my life imploded so spectacularly. Let me take you back to where it all started to unravel. I remember that Tuesday morning like it was yesterday. Crisp autumn air, leaves crunching under my shoes as I walked Emma to school. She was 7 then, all pigtails and gap-toothed smiles, clutching her science project. "Daddy, do you think I'll win first place?" The memory of her hopeful eyes still guts me. "You knocked it out of the park, kiddo," I told her, squeezing her hand. "How could you not win?" I had no idea that by dinner time, my world would collapse. When I got home that evening, Katherine, my wife of 9 years, was sitting at our kitchen island, perfectly composed in that ivory cashmere sweater I'd bought her for Christmas, the one that cost more than my first car. "We need to talk, Ben," she said, not looking up from her wine glass. "I want a divorce." Just like that. No warning, no couples therapy, no late-night conversations about where we went wrong. Just 4 words that detonated my existence. I laughed at first. I actually laughed because it seemed so absurd. Katherine and I had problems, sure. What couple doesn't after almost a decade? But divorce? The word felt foreign in my mouth. "Is this about the promotion?" I asked. She'd been passed over at her law firm the month before, and things had been tense. "Because if you're just stressed—" "I've been seeing someone," she interrupted, finally meeting my eyes. "For 8 months now. His name is Marcus. He's a partner at Colson and Reed." 8 months! While I was coaching Emma's soccer team and working 60-hour weeks to afford our mortgage in the good school district, my wife had been sleeping with one of the most prominent attorneys in Boston. "Marcus understands my ambitions," she continued, as if explaining a particularly complex legal brief to a child. "He's helping me make partner at his firm. We're planning a life together." I should have seen it coming. The late nights at the office, the weekend conferences, the sudden interest in yoga retreats, all classic signs in retrospect. But I'd been too busy being a dad and husband to play detective with my own marriage. "What about Emma?" I managed to ask, my voice barely recognizable. Katherine's expression shifted then, just slightly, and it was the first time I glimpsed what I was truly up against. "Emma will be coming with me, of course." That's when the ground really fell away beneath my feet. Emma was my world, my anchor, my purpose. The thought of not tucking her in every night, of missing her school plays and science fairs, it was unthinkable. "You can't just take her," I said, anger finally breaking through the shock. "I'm her father. I've been the one who's been there, for every sickness, every nightmare, every—" "I'm her mother," Katherine cut in coldly. "And Marcus and I can provide her with opportunities you simply can't. Private school, summer in Europe, connections that will set her up for life." Looking back, that was the moment I should have gotten a lawyer, should have secured my rights before things escalated. But I was still operating under the delusion that 2 reasonable adults could work things out amicably for the sake of their child. God, I was naive. 3 days later, Katherine moved out, taking Emma with her to Marcus's penthouse overlooking the Charles River. I got daily FaceTime calls with my daughter, who cried each time, begging to come home. Each tear was like acid on my heart. Just give it time, I told myself. The courts won't separate a child from a loving father without cause. That's when Katherine's real plan began to unfold. It started with canceled visitations. Emma was suddenly ill or had important events I hadn't been informed about. Then came the court filing. Katherine seeking full custody, claiming I was emotionally unstable and potentially dangerous. I nearly choked reading the allegations. According to my wife of 9 years, I had anger issues, was verbally abusive and had once thrown a glass against the wall during an argument. That last part was true. One time, in 9 years, after discovering my mother's cancer had returned. But the rest? Pure fiction. The real gut punch came 2 weeks later when I was served with a restraining order. Katherine claimed I'd been stalking her, making threatening phone calls, even lurking outside Marcus's building. None of it was true. I was too busy drowning in legal paperwork and trying to keep my job while fighting for my daughter to even think about revenge. But that didn't matter. Marcus had connections throughout the Boston legal system, and suddenly I found myself viewed as the villain in my own life story. The temporary custody hearing was a nightmare. Katherine showed up with Marcus by her side, both in impeccable suits that probably cost more than my monthly salary. I'd hired the best attorney I could afford, draining my savings in the process. "Mr. Reynolds," the judge said, peering at me over her glasses, "these allegations are concerning." "They're completely false, Your Honor," I insisted. We have sworn statements from Ms. Carter's colleagues describing Mr. Reynolds' erratic behavior," Marcus smoothly interjected, "and the building security footage showing him outside our residence at 2 a.m. last Thursday." My head snapped up. "What footage? I wasn't anywhere near—" The judge silenced me with a look. When they showed the grainy security video, my blood ran cold. There was indeed someone outside their building, someone approximately my height and build, wearing a jacket similar to mine. But it wasn't me. I'd been home that night, on the phone with my mother discussing her treatment options. I had phone records to prove it, but Katherine's team had an explanation for everything. The phone could have been on speaker while I was out stalking them. The timing of the calls didn't definitively place me at home. By the end of the hearing, I had lost temporary custody of Emma. I was granted supervised visitation twice a month to see my own daughter, with a court-appointed observer watching my every move as if I were some kind of criminal. I'll never forget Emma's face during our first supervised visit at the sterile Family Services building. She ran to me, throwing her arms around my neck, sobbing, "Daddy, why can't I come home? Mommy says you're sick and need to get better first." My heart shattered into a million pieces. "I'm not sick, sweetheart," I whispered, acutely aware of the supervisor taking notes nearby. "Sometimes grown-ups have disagreements about what's best, but I'm fighting for you, okay? I'll always fight for you." Emma nodded, her little fingers tracing the outline of my watch, a nervous habit she'd developed when she was 4, right after we lost what would have been her little brother. The memory hit me like a physical blow, as it often did when I least expected it. 3 years before everything fell apart, Katherine and I had been expecting our second child. We'd been trying for almost 2 years, endless doctor's appointments, fertility treatments, and the monthly ritual of disappointment that had started to wear on our marriage. When the pregnancy test finally came back positive, it felt like the universe was giving us another chance. Emma, only 4 at the time, had been ecstatic about becoming a big sister. She'd talk to Katherine's stomach every night, telling elaborate stories to the baby she'd named Mr. Kicks because of how active he was. The pregnancy had been harder on Katherine than her first. Severe morning sickness that lasted well into the second trimester. Dizzy spells that would come out of nowhere. I picked up the slack at home, taking over most of Emma's care while still working full-time. It wasn't easy, but seeing Katherine's belly grow, feeling those powerful kicks, it made everything worth it. Then came that horrible night during week 22. I woke up to Katherine's scream, the sheets soaked with blood. The emergency room, the grim faces of the doctors, the horrible choice we were forced to make. "The placenta has detached," the doctor had explained, his voice clinically detached. "Your wife is hemorrhaging internally. We need to terminate the pregnancy immediately, or we could lose her too." Just like that, our son was gone. They'd rushed Katherine into surgery while I sat in the waiting room, numb with shock, trying to figure out how I'd explain to Emma that Mr. Kicks wouldn't be coming home with us. Katherine had nearly died that night. The physical recovery took months. The emotional recovery, well, I'm not sure it ever really happened. We grieved differently. I wanted to talk about it. Katherine shut down completely. She threw herself into work with a new intensity, staying later at the office, taking on higher-profile cases. I focused on Emma, perhaps too much, trying to protect her from the heaviness that had settled over our home. Looking back, I think that's when Katherine and I really began to drift apart. The loss created a canyon between us that we never quite figured out how to cross. Sex became infrequent, mechanical when it happened at all. Conversations stayed surface level. Emma's school, household logistics, scheduling. We became excellent co-parents and terrible partners. I suggested counseling. Katherine declined, saying she didn't have time with her caseload. I tried romantic getaways, date nights, even surprised her with concert tickets to her favorite band. Nothing seemed to reconnect us to what we'd been before. What I didn't know then was that Katherine had already begun confiding in Marcus about our marriage problems. He was leading the case she'd been assigned to, her big break at the firm. Late strategy sessions turned into drinks. Drinks turned into emotional confessions, and eventually into an affair. While I was at home, still trying to repair our broken family, she was building an escape route. Now, watching Emma trace my watch face with her small finger, I wondered if Katherine ever thought about the son we'd lost, if that grief still visited her in quiet moments the way it did me, if maybe, in some twisted way, replacing me with Marcus was her attempt to outrun that pain, to create a new narrative where that loss didn't define her. Emma nodded solemnly, her small face too serious for a 7-year-old. Marcus tells Mommy they're going to win because he knows all the judges. He says you'll give up eventually. In that moment, something inside me hardened. This wasn't just about Katherine leaving me. This was a calculated plan to erase me from my daughter's life. And Marcus wasn't just the other man. He was the architect. That night, after the visit, I sat in my car in the parking lot for hours, a dangerous idea taking root. If Katherine and Marcus could fabricate evidence against me, what if I gathered real evidence against them? Massachusetts is a two-party consent state for recordings, making what I was considering potentially illegal. But when you're drowning and someone's holding your head underwater, you don't worry about swimming etiquette. I started small. I set up a discreet audio recorder in my own apartment for when Katherine came by to collect more of Emma's things. I installed an app on my phone to record our conversations when arranging visitations. I documented every canceled visit, every time Emma mentioned being coached on what to say. But the real breakthrough came through an unlikely source. Diane, the receptionist at Katherine's law firm, whose son was in Emma's class. We'd chatted, at school functions, and she'd always seemed to find Katherine's Ice Queen persona distasteful. "Ben," she said when we bumped into each other at a school fundraiser I wasn't technically supposed to attend, "I hate what's happening to you. It's not right." Over coffee afterward, Diane revealed that Katherine and Marcus's relationship wasn't the romance of the century they portrayed it to be. It was nakedly transactional. She got a fast track to partnership. He got the trophy wife his midlife crisis demanded. "And they're not discreet," Diane whispered, glancing around the cafe. "The things I've overheard." Katherine was laughing about the restraining order with the paralegals, called it her nuclear option. Said Marcus knew exactly which judge would believe her without question. My blood boiled, but I kept my face neutral. "Diane, would you be willing to make a statement about what you've heard?" She hesitated. "I need this job, Ben. I'm a single mom myself." "I understand," I said, already formulating a plan B. "But hypothetically, does Marcus ever use the firm's email for personal communication?" Diane's slight smile told me everything I needed to know. 2 days later, I received an anonymous email with login credentials for a guest account on the firm's server. I knew accessing it could be considered illegal, but at that point, I was willing to risk everything for Emma. What I found made me physically ill. Emails between Katherine and Marcus, dating back over a year, explicit descriptions of their rendezvous in his office, her cold calculations about divorce strategy, his coaching on how to manipulate the custody battle, and most damning of all, discussions about fabricating evidence against me. J. Can Doctor. The security footage, Marcus wrote in one email. He owes me for the DUI thing last year. Just make sure Ben doesn't have an ironclad alibi for Thursday night. There it was, proof they had falsified evidence. I forwarded everything to a secure email account, then deleted all traces of my access. But the real jackpot came in an audio file attached to one of Katherine's emails. It was a recording of her coaching Emma on what to say to the custody evaluator. "Remember, honey, if they ask about Daddy, you say he yells a lot and it scares you," Katherine's voice instructed. "But Daddy doesn't yell," Emma's small voice protested. "He only gets loud when we play monsters." "Emma," Katherine's voice turned sharp, "do you want to go to that special horse camp this summer? Because if we don't win this case, there won't be any horse camp. No trips to Paris, no private school with your new friends. You'll be stuck in that tiny apartment with Daddy who can barely afford pizza night." "That's not fair," Emma whimpered. "Life isn't fair," Katherine snapped. "Now let's practice again. What does Daddy do that scares you?" Hearing my daughter being manipulated broke something in me. I wasn't just gathering evidence anymore, I was out for blood. The opportunity presented itself at the firm's annual charity gala, a lavish affair I shouldn't have been able to access. But Diane, bless her, had mentioned it was being held at the Four Seasons, where my college roommate happened to be an events manager. "One service staff badge," Jake said, sliding it across the table at our meetup. "You didn't get this from me." "I was never here," I agreed, slipping him an envelope with cash I couldn't afford to part with. The night of the gala, I worked as a waiter, keeping my head down, a baseball cap pulled low. Katherine would never notice me. In our marriage, she barely registered the existence of service staff. It was one of the million little things that should have warned me about who she really was. Marcus, unsurprisingly, drank too much, celebrating. Their latest victory in court, no doubt. I watched from the periphery as he got handsy with Katherine in full view of his colleagues, her plastic smile never faltering even as she firmly removed his hand from her ass. But the real show began when Katherine excused herself, and Marcus immediately zeroed in on a young paralegal. I followed discreetly, pretending to collect glasses, and positioned myself behind a massive floral arrangement just as Marcus cornered the woman on a deserted balcony. "Jamie, don't play hard to get," his slurred voice carried clearly as I activated the recording app on my phone. "We both know how this profession works. You help me unwind, I make sure you're not stuck doing document review for the next 5 years. Mr. Coulson, I'm flattered, but I'm really not comfortable with—" "Katherine understands how these things work," he continued, his voice taking on an edge I recognized all too well. "It's just stress relief, nothing personal." I didn't intervene when he got more aggressive. I'm not proud of that. But I needed this evidence more than the paralegal needed a white knight. At least that's what I told myself when I heard her uncomfortable laughter, followed by rapid footsteps, as she finally extracted herself. Over the next 3 hours, I documented Marcus propositioning 2 more young women, making racially charged comments to a bartender, and most incredibly, conducting what was clearly a drug deal in the men's room with a partner from another firm. By the end of the night, I had enough to destroy not just his professional reputation, but potentially trigger a bar association investigation. As for Katherine, I heard her in the ladies' room with a senior partner's wife, laughing about how she'd secured her future by baby-trapping Marcus with a pregnancy she had no intention of carrying to term. I knew exactly what she meant. Katherine had told me for years she never wanted another child after the difficult pregnancy with Emma. I barely recognized the cold, calculating woman on my recordings. Had she always been this person? Had I been completely blind? Or had power and ambition transformed her? Either way, I now had my ammunition. The next phase of my plan required careful timing. The final custody hearing was scheduled for the following month. I needed to deploy my evidence strategically for maximum impact. I started with Marcus's firm. Anonymous emails with select recordings went to the managing partners, the young women he'd harassed, and their HR department. I made sure to time it right before a major client presentation Marcus was leading. Within 48 hours, Marcus was placed on administrative leave pending an investigation. Katherine was suddenly without her powerful protector. Next, I sent the recording of Katherine coaching Emma to our custody evaluator, along with documentation of the falsified security footage. I included Diane's written statement, she'd finally agreed to help after hearing the recordings, and evidence of Katherine's pregnancy deception. The final touch was delivering a comprehensive file to the judge herself, showing the systematic campaign to fraudulently deny me custody. The aftermath was swift and merciless. Katherine's partnership track evaporated when Marcus was forced to resign. The judge ordered a new custody evaluation and appointed a guardian ad litem for Emma. The restraining order was revealed as fraudulent and immediately vacated. At our emergency hearing, Katherine appeared without her usual polished confidence. Marcus was nowhere to be seen. Rumor had it he'd fled to his house in the Caymans while the firm conducted its internal investigation. In light of this new evidence, the judge stated, looking directly at Katherine, this court finds the plaintiff's previous testimony highly questionable. Temporary full custody is hereby granted to the defendant, Benjamin Reynolds, pending final determination. Katherine's face contorted with rage. This is all manipulated. He hacked private emails. These recordings are illegal. The judge's expression hardened. Ms. Carter, you might want to consult with your attorney before making further allegations that could implicate you in serious ethical violations. This court takes attempts to manipulate custody proceedings extremely seriously. 2 days later, Emma came home. She ran through our apartment, touching everything like she couldn't believe it was real. My room is still the same, she whispered, hugging her old stuffed rabbit. Of course it is, I said, fighting back tears. I've been waiting for you. That night, as I tucked her in, Emma looked up at me with those solemn eyes that had seen too much. Mommy said really bad things about you. I knew they weren't true, but she said I had to say them or else. I swallowed the rage that threatened to choke me. Sometimes adults make bad choices when they're afraid or when they want something too much. Your mom loves you, but she made some mistakes. Is she in trouble now? Emma asked. She has to face consequences for her choices, I said carefully. Just like you do when you break the rules at school. Emma nodded, processing this with the straightforward logic of children. Marcus is in bigger trouble. Mommy says he ruined everything and she hates him now. I wasn't surprised. Katherine had always needed someone else to blame. The following weeks brought a cascade of repercussions I hadn't fully anticipated. The Bar Association launched an ethics investigation into both Katherine and Marcus. Katherine's firm distanced themselves from her, putting her on leave to focus on personal matters. Marcus's other victims came forward, triggering a sexual harassment lawsuit that made the local news. And then came the knock on my door I'd been dreading. 2 detectives, looking grim and official, with questions about illegally obtained emails and unauthorized recordings. Apparently, Katherine had filed criminal charges against me for electronic privacy violations. My attorney didn't sugarcoat it. They have evidence you accessed private servers, Ben. The recordings in Massachusetts without consent, that's a felony. We're talking potential jail time here. What about Emma? I asked, my stomach dropping. If you're convicted of a felony, it complicates custody significantly. The irony was bitter enough to choke on. I'd fought so hard to get my daughter back, that I might lose her again. this time to the foster care system while I sat in a cell. Katherine, meanwhile, seemed determined to burn every bridge. She'd filed complaints against the judge, the custody evaluator, and her own former colleagues. Her partnership prospects were dead, but she'd pivoted to presenting herself as a whistleblower, exposing corruption in the legal system. In our next court appearance, her new attorney, a shark-eyed woman with a reputation for scorched earth litigation, argued that both Katherine and I were unfit parents, and that Emma should be placed with Katherine's sister temporarily. The judge, clearly exhausted by the case, ordered another round of evaluations for everyone. That evening, I received a text from Katherine, the first direct communication we'd had in months. "Coffee tomorrow. Just you and me. We need to end this before we both lose everything." I met her at a neutral location, a busy cafe where neither of us could make a scene. Katherine looked different, the designer clothes replaced by simple jeans and a sweater, her perfect blowout grown out to show dark roots. She looked more like the woman I'd married 15 years earlier, before ambition and status consumed her. "You've destroyed my career," she said without preamble. "You tried to steal my daughter," I replied evenly. She stared into her untouched coffee. "Marcus is filing a countersuit against me. Claims I orchestrated everything. The firm is hanging me out to dry." I felt no satisfaction at her downfall, just bone-deep exhaustion. "What do you want, Katherine?" "A truce," she said. "I'll drop the criminal charges if you agree to joint custody. 50-50. I keep my law license, you stay out of jail, and Emma gets both parents." "After everything you did? The lies, the manipulation." "We both went too far," she interrupted, her eyes finally meeting mine. "You invaded my privacy, recorded conversations illegally, possibly committed federal crimes accessing those servers. Neither of us can claim the moral high ground anymore." She was right, and I hated her for it. "Emma loves you," I admitted reluctantly. "Despite everything, she misses her mother." Katherine's composure cracked slightly, a glimpse of genuine pain breaking through. "I do love her, Ben. It got twisted up with everything else, but I've always loved her." We hammered out a preliminary agreement there in that cafe. Joint custody, with a detailed parenting plan. No disparagement clauses with financial penalties. Family therapy for all three of us. Katherine would move back to our old neighborhood to minimize disruption for Emma. As for Marcus, he'd become toxic in Boston legal circles. Last I heard, he was trying to rebuild his practice in Arizona, where apparently they were less concerned about his history of harassment. That was 2 years ago. Today, Emma is 10, thriving in school, and splitting her time between Katherine's condo and my apartment. Katherine has started her own small practice specializing in women's legal issues, an irony I choose not to dwell on. I'm dating occasionally, though Emma remains my priority. We're not friends, Katherine and I, but we're no longer enemies. At Emma's last soccer game, we actually sat together on the sidelines, cheering in unison when she scored a goal. It wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't warfare either. Sometimes I look back at those dark months and barely recognize myself. The man who methodically gathered evidence, who stood by recording while another woman was harassed, who risked prison in his quest for vengeance disguised as justice. Was it worth it? That's the question Dave asked when he invited me to share this story. The honest answer is, I don't know. I got my daughter back, yes. But I compromised parts of myself I'd once thought unbreakable. The ends justified the means in the most pragmatic sense, but I'm not sure my soul fully agrees. If there's a lesson here, maybe it's this. When you're fighting monsters, be careful you don't become one, because once you cross certain lines, you can never fully go back. Emma asked me recently if I hated her mother. I told her no, that hate takes too much energy, and I'd rather use that energy to love her instead. It wasn't entirely true. Part of me will always hate what Katherine did, But what I didn't tell Emma is that I've also made my peace with it. Because without Catherine's betrayal, I might never have discovered my own capacity for both darkness and resilience. In the end, perhaps that's the most unsettling revelation of all. Not that someone you loved could hurt you so deeply, but that, given the right circumstances, you're capable of hurting them right back. And sometimes, late at night, I still wonder which is the greater tragedy.